Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, cut off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
What you know, good and camp. You're listening to the Church Politics Podcast with Justin Giboney, a.k.a. Bishop Cooper's grandson. And I'm going to be honest with you right now. I was hating on Sunday during the Chiefs and Bills game. I was hating. I don't like the Chiefs. I don't know about y'all, man. And here's the crazy thing. I do like Patrick Mahomes. I actually like their coach, too. I just don't like the Chiefs as a whole anymore, though. Now, part of that is because I'm from Denver. You know, Denver and Kansas City, you know, we have our differences, right? So that's part of it. I got some cousins who are from Kansas City who are huge Chiefs fans, and, you know, I just don't, they don't need to have any more championships. Let's just put it that way. Okay. So I was hating. The other thing about the Chiefs, they get a lot of calls they shouldn't get. I mean, there were several, let's be honest, guys. There were several calls during this game that were very questionable. That catch where the ball actually hit the ground, but they said it was a catch. When Allen, they said he didn't get the first down, but it looked pretty clear. And even when the referees, it looked like he got that first down. Those were critical plays. And it just so happens that those kind of plays always go for the Chiefs these days. I'm not making any conspiracy theories or anything like that. I'm just saying they get a lot of bounces and calls that they shouldn't get. And I just want to see somebody else in the NFL championship, man. So I'll admit I'm hating, you know, and you guys know my theory. It's okay to hate when it comes to sports sometimes, but I really did not want to see the Kansas City Chiefs in the championship. Not a huge Philadelphia fan either, so I'll just be watching, man. I'll just be trying to watch to see a good game, man. But hopefully, those of you out there who do have a team in there, best of luck to you. I was hoping it was going to be, I was going to say the Redskins. I was hoping it was going to be DC and the Bills, but that's not going to happen. Shout out to my man, Michael Ware. I know he's probably looking for a shoulder to cry on right now. That was a tough loss, but you guys had a good team. Hopefully y'all do better next year. The other thing I have to say, which might be somewhat controversial before we get into this politics stuff, is Saquon Barkley should be the MVP. Let's be honest. I'm one of those folks that think there is this obsession with quarterbacks, and I get it. But if you're talking about this dude was making plays that were just amazing, and he's been doing it all year. So if I had a vote, which I don't, I would vote for Saquon Barkley, man. That boy can run. And maybe I like Saquon. Maybe I'll cheer for them just based off Saquon Barkley. But he had an excellent year, man, to get traded and to step up in the way that he did. Nothing but love for him, man. Nothing but love at all. All right, but let's start getting into this, man. First and foremost, let me thank all our patrons and supporters for supporting this show and what we do and how we do it. There's not a lot of shows that are going to be able to say the things that we say. We always say it with compassion, but we're going to keep it real, and you guys allow us to do that. So thank you for your support. If you want to get premium episodes of this show and you want to support this show, you can go to patreon.com/churchpolitics. You will get a premium episode along with the episodes that everybody else gets. So you become a patron, and I'll make sure that you get another episode. All right. Today, so for instance, this week I will be talking about my views on DEI. I had a post on Instagram that people were like, "Hey, what are your full views on DEI?" So I'll give you more of a full view on that. I'll also talk about what happened with the Tuskegee Airmen and the folks in the Air Force being taught about that. So if you want to hear that, you got to become a patron. All right. Everybody else knows what it is. Grab your Bible, get your mind right, and prepare to think not like a Republican, not like a Democrat, but to think like a Christian. And as always, y'all know how we get down. We're going to start with scripture. And I want to go back and forth. I want to give you King James, and then I want to give you some of the NIV, okay? So if we go to Deuteronomy 1:17, it says, "Ye shall not respect persons in judgment, but ye shall hear the small as well as the great." How is that? How is that kind of translated in NIV? It says, "Do not show partiality in judging. Hear both small and great alike." Okay. Let's go to Proverbs 24:25. The King James says, "These things also belong to the wise. It is not good to have respect of persons in judgment." If we go to NIV, it says, "To show partiality in judging is not good." Romans 2:11 says, "For there is no respect of persons in God." I think you're getting the point. I don't know that you need the NIV on that one. But let's go ahead to Luke. Let's go to Luke 20:21. And it says, "And they asked him, saying, Master, we know that thou sayest and teachest rightly. Neither acceptest thou the person of any, but teachest the way of God truly." Okay, that's um, King James. Let's see what this says. This Luke 20:21 says in the NIV. "Teacher, we know that you speak and teach what is right, and that you do not show partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with the truth." Luke 20:21 is interesting to me because this is actually, they were trying to set Jesus up, right? So they're telling Jesus, like, we know that you are no respecter of persons. We know that you don't show partiality. They were trying to set him up, and that's when they were about to ask him, should they, pay taxes and all that. But I think one thing it also shows is that Jesus, even among people who disagreed with him or didn't believe in him, still had a reputation for not being a respecter of persons or not being partial. Now, the Greek word used here in these scriptures means prejudiced, right? You're not prejudiced. You're not biased against people, places, and ideas. So throughout all these four scriptures, it's saying there is no prejudice in God. It's not saying that God doesn't respect people. It's saying that God doesn't look at somebody, look at their circumstances, or look at who they are because they have high standing or they're a king or something like that, and judge them differently than he would judge somebody else. God does not show favoritism in that way, and neither should we. Right? It's saying that it's wise not to show partiality, not to be a respecter of persons. And I want to talk about how that applies to us in the public square, because I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to judge people fairly, or for us to judge people based on if we like that type of people or not, if that type of people is on our side or not. There's a lot of opportunities in the public square to do that. And I want to give you an example of where that came up recently. So maybe about 2 weeks ago now, we can have something like that. I posted a video of an argument between Congressman Nancy Mace and Congressman Jasmine Crockett. Okay. And this occurred in a congressional hearing about a week or so ago. Now I'll say this: these two, anybody who really follows this stuff, they know that Congressman Nancy Mace and Congressman Jasmine Crockett have built reputations for themselves of being people who are provocative, who are always going to attack the other side, and a lot of people like them because that's how they act. They like them because, oh, she told her off. She said what I wanted to say to them. They like to see them try to humiliate people. And that's what they've been known for. I mean, I've talked to people who are very close to what's going on the Hill, and they said there are a lot of even African American Democrats that are like, hey, Jasmine Crockett needs to chill a little bit because it's actually hurting us, right? So there are sensible people around that are like, these two and the reputation they're building is not constructive. Like, these are not constructive conversations. Okay. So when I shared the video, I basically said, essentially, I was saying that both of these two ladies need to be corrected by their parties and by their supporters for their consistent behavior that is really below the office. And there's men you can throw in there too. So this isn't about gender or anything like that. But these were the two that were arguing at the moment. So I was like, hey, they need to be corrected by the people who support them and the people who are around them, because this is not what they're doing. This consistent behavior is not conducive to solving any problems for anybody. It's showmanship. You're in the hearing. You know there's cameras in the hearing, so you're showing out for the camera. And this happens. This is not the first time that this has happened. It happens over and over again. And people who are watching somewhat objectively know that these two are kind of known for that. Now, I make that statement not expecting partisans to like it very much, right? Like you kind of know after a while what people aren't going to be happy with. I thought it was important to say so people would say, hey, we need to stop doing this. I want you to see what they're doing so you know they're not serving you and you might say something to them, right? So I said, look, you know, I know some people will just defend the indefensible here and blame everything on the other side. I know that's going to happen, but I think it's important for the people to see how some people are acting on the Hill when they're supposed to be serious and doing business. And a lot of people agree with me. I would think most people agree with me, but I did get hit with two primary complaints, right? Um, and I don't even want to call them arguments because they weren't really arguments. They didn't, you know, have a premise and a conclusion. They were really just complaints. They weren't cogent arguments. The first one that I got was, well, the other side did worse. So Nancy Mace was worse than Jasmine Crockett, or Jasmine Crockett was worse than Nancy Mace, right? That's the first problem I got. That's the first complaint I got. And again, that's just a very bad comeback, right? I mean, I tell my sons all the time, I don't care what the other kid did, you have to behave a certain way. Their behavior doesn't justify your behavior, even if it's worse. That's basic wisdom that we try to tell our kids, but I guess we shouldn't be surprised that some adults still use that excuse when they don't want anybody to say something to somebody they like. And in my opinion, it's the question is, was it right or wrong? Was it helpful or unhelpful? The main question is, who was worse? That's not the main question to me. Was what this person did right or wrong? Was what the other person did right or wrong? We can get to which was worse after that. But if none of it is productive, all of it needs to be critiqued. Okay? But here's the second one, and I want to spend a little more time on this second complaint, which was probably less cogent than the first. Secondly, some people clearly thought that I should not have made that critique at all, simply based on the identity of the two people. How dare I critique a conservative when progressives are so bad? How dare I critique a Black woman when she's fighting against the other side? Now, anybody that knows me knows that my rule when it comes to this is no one is above or below a fair and constructive critique. Now, if we're not talking about fair and constructive, that's a whole nother conversation. But nobody is above or below a fair and constructive critique, not even me. There's been times I've come on here and I've gotten a fair and constructive critique and I've had to apologize and say, you know what? I could do that better. Not even a family member. If a family member of mine is an elected official and they show bad behavior, they have to be critiqued. Otherwise, I'm not doing what I claim to be doing, right? Now, I do want to say this, and I think this is where some people are coming from. To be fair, there are those who benefit from always critiquing their identity group, right? You have some people that are basically on call to be the Black person that insults other Black people. You have some people that are basically on call to be the Christian who insults other Christians. So every time the Washington Post or somebody else needs a Christian to talk bad about other Christians, they have these people on speed dial. And so they're kind of shucking and jiving because there's an industry for that kind of message, to get somebody who looks a certain way to critique their own people, usually very harshly and performatively. I get that, right? So we can say those are not constructive and fair critiques. So we can take them out. And it's interesting because we'll get to that later. We'll get to that later. All right. Well, no, I'll give the story. So one time, I'm not going to say any names though. One time I was asked to go on this Republicans podcast, right? So he was like, hey man, come on my podcast. We'll talk blah, blah, blah. He knew I had been in Democratic politics. He knew that I had a serious critique of Democratic politics, right? On the other side. So when we get on, I think he got a little bit upset because I wasn't just critiquing Democrats. I was also critiquing Republicans. And so during the break, he was like, hey man, I didn't really bring you on to talk about Republicans. I brought you on to talk about Democrats. And I was like, bruh, I don't get brought on just to talk about Democrats. I'm not gonna be used to do that, right? Like, so you brought the wrong person on if you thought that I was just gonna play the game and say what you wanted me to say about the other side so that you could feel good about that and say, see, he even agrees with us. No. You brought the wrong person on, and I gotta admit I have not been on there again. But I say that to say I do get the industry behind certain people being used to attack their identity group. That's a problem. Okay. That's not a fair and constructive critique. All right. But I want to give you guys, I want to be clear. I want to give you guys a few reasons that it's a bad idea to refuse to publicly critique people who are in your identity group or on your side. All right. I'm going to give you 3 reasons why that's actually a bad idea for you, why it doesn't work out for you. Okay. So here's the first one. And this is purely biblical, right? It makes us respecters of persons. It makes us partial, and being partial is a sin. Over and over again, the Bible tells us that we need to be impartial, that we can't look at somebody because of where they came from or the color of their skin or anything else and judge them differently than we would judge somebody else. That's wrong. And even if you're not the judge in a court, even if you're just judging what somebody says and if it's right or wrong or how it should be treated, you have to be impartial. Now, let me say this, by all means, celebrate your identity. Do what you have to do to have a healthy self-image, because I will say, whether it's women and especially Black women have been through a lot, have been talked about, have been unfairly critiqued. And so I do understand why people are going to have this knee-jerk reaction to say, hold on, don't say anything. That's not the answer. But I do think historically there's a reason why some people are more serious about the critiques that they get, because they have been subject to a lot of unfair critiques. However, that's not a justification for being partial, right? It might be a justification for defending somebody when the critique isn't fair, but if the critique is fair, then it's fair. All right. We should, again, you can celebrate your culture, but don't become an identitarian. And what a lot of people want you to be, especially if an organization, most of the people in that organization are certain colors, they want you to be an identitarian. And an identitarian is someone who only cares about the uplift of their culture. And they're willing to hurt others, and they're willing to sin against others or make false allegations or treat them differently to get an advantage for their group. And all of us have been hurt by that. And it's wrong. It's wrong when somebody else does it. It's wrong when you do it. That's the Bible. That's not Justin Gibney. I gave you scripture above to go with that. Right? Just gave you several scriptures. The Bible says that it's wrong. And I'm sure that we hate it when other groups do it to us. So don't do the same thing. Be better. And that's the choice that we always have to make. Do we reciprocate something that we received the same way we got it, or can we do better? And I think there's a lot of Christians throughout history that give us an example of saying, yeah, you treated me with partiality. I'm not going to do the same thing to you. It's a matter of faith, in my opinion. So that's number one. It makes us respecters of persons. Number two, if we refuse to critique people in our identity group or on our side, it keeps us from improving and gaining understanding. Proverbs 15:32 says, the one who heeds correction gains understanding. The idea that coddling and not publicly correcting your own side is the best way to care is simply unwise and short-sighted. It's not supported by scripture. That by me making sure that you're never critiqued, that nobody ever says anything critical about you is the best way to help you is not true. It's unwise. It may seem that way, but it's incredibly short-sighted to think that way. And we can go through historical examples. We can go through the Bible over and over again. That's not the way that things work. We have to decide if we are more worried about pretending that we're blameless in front of other cultures, which they never believe us. And I'm talking about we Christians, Black people, white people, whoever. We can pretend that we're blameless and never critique each other like that's going to fool somebody into thinking we're blameless. or we can actually be more concerned about pursuing virtue and being better people, right? This is one of the things that I learned so well from Nanny Helen Burroughs. If you don't know who Nanny Helen Burroughs is, you need to look her up. She always critiqued her own, she critiqued others too, all right? Because that's helpful to them, right? Not correcting people with a shared identity when they have bad behavior means we accept a lower and lower standard. We shouldn't want the standard to go lower and lower just because we're trying to protect ourselves all the time. Again, we're talking about fair and constructive critique. We're not talking about beating people up for no reason. All right. So I want to make sure that we keep this in context of what we're talking about. Right. That's number 2. It keeps us from improving and gaining understanding. Iron sharpens iron. How do we sharpen people if we're always afraid, running away from critique, as if protecting ourselves in that way is going to make us better? All right. Number 3, this is why you need to have that fair and constructive critique. Because if you don't critique people in your own identity group or on your own side, you lose credibility. If someone in your in group does something obviously wrong and you refuse to critique it, then you'll have no credibility to critique anything anyone else does, because you'll be obviously biased. People in the public square won't see you as a good faith actor. We see you as somebody who's prejudiced, somebody who's biased, and somebody who's always going to be going for one side. Why would we listen to somebody like that? You lose credibility, right? And this is why many of the influencers we listen to can only preach to the choir. They can only influence people within their own group because they don't have credibility to be believed by anybody else because they've been so prejudiced. And here's the kicker. If you really want to help your people, if you really want to help the public square and help in general, keep in mind, we live in a society, we have a form of government where you have to persuade other people. If you have no credibility, credibility in a democracy is currency. If you have no credibility to speak to somebody outside of your in group, how in the world do you persuade them to support you on something that you need support for? You can't persuade them because you're too biased and they have no reason to think that you'll be a fair, a good faith actor and do anything but help yourself. We need to persuade others to actually help our own people, to actually help our neighbor. And again, we cannot do that if we refuse to have an honest critique. When you see somebody in your in group or out of your in group do something wrong, in some cases you need to say something about it and you need to be honest about it. But if you're going to defend the indefensible, just understand that you're losing the currency of credibility to have a public witness that actually can persuade people and be trusted outside of your in group. I'll be right back on Church Politics Podcast.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
And I am back on the Church Politics Podcast. I think it's safe to say that almost every family has been impacted by mental illness. And for so many years, people, Christians, didn't really talk about it. You had that uncle or that cousin that just kind of stayed in their room, never really came out, and no one asked a whole lot of questions about it. You might have talked about it here and there, and people had their guesses on what was going on, but there just wasn't a conversation. And so I am thankful that there's a greater conversation about mental illness in the United States and even in the church right now. So all of you mental health advocates who have been advocating in the church and outside the church, God bless you, because it's very important work, and it's one of those things that was so shrouded in secrecy for so long that I think a lot of people suffered because we just did not have the conversation and we kind of tried to cover it up. All right. And I bring this up because I was reading an article by Stephen Ide and Unheard. And I think Unheard is a really good, they have some good podcasts, they have some good writers. A lot of their stuff is a little more conservative than I am, but I still think they are, for the most part, intellectually honest, asking. I like people who ask new questions, make me think about new things, and have a kind of a curiosity, because so much of our partisan back and forth just lacks curiosity, it lacks diligence. And Unheard is one of those sources that I appreciate, whether I agree with it all the time or not. But anyway, Stephen Ide does a lot of work on homelessness, from what I understand. And he wrote an article in Unheard titled Bring Back Paternalism for the Mentally Ill. And he says small government is not the answer. And here he's really advocating, and I'll kind of read some of it, but he's really advocating for getting the mentally ill back into institutions to help them rather than just kind of leaving them on the street, especially when you go to the West, the Pacific Northwest. The answer has really just been to kind of let them do it unless they want to go get help. They don't really have to. He's saying, no, let's be more paternalistic about this. Basically, let's tell people what they have to do in this regard, and it'll actually be better for them, right? Paternalism is not usually something that people advocate for. In this article, that's kind of the argument that's made in regard to those with mental illness. And here's kind of what he says. I'll read some of the article. He says, and he's trying to convince the Trump administration to do this because they're in the administration now, obviously. Donald Trump is a master of disrupting stale bipartisan orthodoxies and remaking the politics of familiar issues. He did so with free trade and industrial policy in his first term, forcing even the Biden administration to adopt his views. This time around, his tough stance on the border, which helped him win in November, may form the next consensus. America's mental health crisis, recently highlighted by a string of horrific attacks in the New York subway system, presents another such opportunity. That crisis consists of 4 million or so adults with untreated serious mental illnesses such as bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. The result is homelessness, mass shootings, random subway violence, and incarceration, especially in Democratic areas that shifted sharply to the right in the 2024 election. Trump can disrupt and realign the status quo, provided he ignores small government zealots in his own camp. And he gives some history about this. So apparently, and I kind of knew this. And I don't know if any of you have read, a lot of y'all probably read One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, stuff like that, really hit on what all the bad things that were going on in some of these mental institutions and was part of the kind of unraveling of it. And some of that, obviously, some of that stuff desperately needed to be reformed. But he gives us some history on this, okay? And I think it's interesting. So he says that back in the 1960s, and I'm reading this, the deinstitutionalization of the mentally ill was a joint effort from fiscal conservatives and progressive civil libertarians, the former shuttering mental health hospitals in the name of austerity, the latter for autonomy's sake. That's really interesting. So you have these fiscal conservatives that are saying, yeah, we need to shut down these mental institutions because they cost too much. And then you have these progressive civil libertarians who are saying we need to shut down these institutions because they go against autonomy. Wow. I think those are two really bad reasons to shut down these institutions. Now, did these institutions, from what I recall reading about them and seeing things that went on there, did they need to be reformed? Absolutely. But to shut them down because it was too expensive, or to shut them down because the mentally ill didn't have enough autonomy. If we're talking about somebody who's mentally ill, the first thing it's not an autonomy issue. That's interesting. So he goes on to say, in the decades that followed, the number of psychiatric beds nationally dropped to 35,000, down from 560,000. We're talking about 500,000, over 500,000 people that actually had mental illness and had somewhere to stay, to 500,000 people basically either going, I guess, maybe going home or just being on the streets. Very interesting information, man. And I'll be honest with you, I've read this article. I've read a couple other articles on it. I'm not pretending to be an expert on this. I'm not going to give you an expert opinion on this. But sometimes I just bring things like this up so we think about them. What do we prefer? Would we prefer the government basically saying, hey, we, through this very strong process, right? You don't want to just summarily be saying people are mentally ill and need to be in an institution for no reason. But we went through this process. You've been checked out. As a mentally ill person, you need to go to an institution. And we're going to be paternalistic, and we're going to make you go to this institution. Now, that comes with the horror stories of somebody actually not being it and getting put in there anyway. And we heard stories that happened like that of that in the past. Or to really just let these people be on the streets. I mean, when you see somebody defecating on the streets, it's probably because they're mentally ill. And that's a sad situation. The answer for places like San Francisco and other places has been, hey, if they're on drugs or whatever, let them stay. If you move them, that's the uncompassionate thing to do. Let them stay on the streets and make their own decisions and go from there. Again, but we're talking about people that are basically incapacitated to a certain extent. To me, this is a debate worth having. Again, I don't have the full answer. It seems to me that there needs to be a little more institutionalization, especially when you just have people suffering on the streets. And then you're in areas where children need to walk those streets, where the elderly need to walk those streets. So you have the people who are actually mentally ill suffering because they're not getting the medication or the help that they need. In many instances, from what it seems like, they're actually self-medicating. And then you have the people who have to use these streets and be in these areas, children, elderly, and other people who it makes it unsafe for them, right? So it seems like there needs to be more. How much? I haven't done enough research to say, but isn't this worth a conversation worth having? I'm sure if you look hard enough, there's probably somebody in all of our families who has been on the street because of mental illness. These are the type of debates that we need to have. And this is exactly why, when we go back to the last conversation, I don't need elected officials showing out for TV and getting in fights and trying to humiliate people and talking trash so they can go viral. I need elected officials and leaders who are serious people that are going to talk about these issues. Because guess what? When you're always playing around and trying to get in front of the camera and trying to show out on somebody, you're wasting time that could be used to have conversations like this. All right? Let me give you what he says in his conclusion. He says, to promote reform, and this is his strategy, to promote reform, we should frame untreated serious mental illness, and he's saying serious, so he's not just saying anybody with a slight mental illness, so I want to be clear on that. He said we should frame untreated serious mental illness as more of a family problem than an urban one, thinking about how government may best support family caregivers is the most coherent way to build an effective mental health system, one that anticipates crises before tragedy strikes. Perhaps that framing may also build more support among Republicans, the party of family values. In terms of the policy, a realignment on mental health should be structured around more spending on services for the seriously mentally ill and more paternalism. New York and other major cities would benefit, but there would be far more beneficiaries there. So they wouldn't be the only people that benefited from it. Again, it's worth reading. I would check this article out if you get a chance. We'll make sure that we put it in the show notes. But again, I think this is a conversation we need to be having. And we should be able to talk about stuff like this and learn more about stuff like this and not just immediately form an opinion, right? So let's think it over. I'm not here to give you what the answer is, but I do want us to be thinking about this and maybe we can come back to it. But hopefully our government and our leaders start having this conversation. I'll be right back on the Church Politics Podcast.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
And I'm back on the Church Politics Podcast. Everybody knows that last week, President Trump came into office for his second term. We all saw it. There's a lot of discussion. There will be a lot of discussion around this and how this administration is going to go. But the first thing that struck me was just the intensity of the administration. Very different administration than we saw the first time, where there was a lot of wolf tickets, there was this and that. It was very clear that this time around, for better or worse, they have hit the ground running. Whether it's the immigration stuff, whether it's the back and forth that we saw with Colombia or whatever. This administration, I mean, let's face it, even when it comes to the ceasefire, they negotiated the ceasefire before they were even in office. So it's very clear that they came in to determine to get things done, to speed things up, and it's been extremely intense. And from what I can tell, based on the polls that I saw come out, I guess just under a week ago, it's having an impact on those polls. So CBS News came out with a poll recently, and it asked people, are they generally optimistic or pessimistic about the next 4 years with Donald Trump as president? Check this out, because I know a lot of people on here are not supporters of Trump, and I'm with you. I feel that. Listen, though. 60% of Americans said that they were optimistic. 40% of Americans said they were pessimistic. Let me go a little deeper. Let's dig into this a little more. When it comes to white Americans, 63% of white Americans said that they were optimistic. 37% said they were pessimistic. Black people. Now let's go to Hispanics. Go to Hispanics first. 61%, only 2% lower than white Americans. 61% of Hispanic Americans said they were optimistic. Only 39 said they were pessimistic. Let's go to black people. 49% of African Americans said they were optimistic. 51 said they were pessimistic. That's basically 50-50. What happened over these last few months, few years? I mean, you talk about a vibe shift, and I kind of talked about the vibe shift in the article I did for Christianity Today. But Donald Trump has never had these kind of numbers. This is after January 6th. Like, you understand what I'm saying? None of that stuff has gone away. This is after becoming a felon, getting, felony charges. All this is after that. Look at male and female. 65% of men are optimistic. Only 35% are pessimistic. 55% of women are optimistic. 45% are pessimistic. 30% of Democrats are optimistic. 94% of the GOP. 54% of independents optimistic. White people with no degree. 67% of white people with no degree are optimistic. White people with a 4-year degree, 56%. Almost in every category, he's in the plus, he's on the positive side of it. This is going to be studied for years. How do the Democrats drop the ball so badly that you have this many people excited about somebody who beforehand they did not like, whose last administration, who just lost, right? You lost and you come back better with a better reputation after all these court cases and all this stuff going on with January 6th and denying the outcome of the election. There's got to be some serious soul searching. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know if progressives have the humility to do it. There's a lot of hubris. There's a lot of denial going on, but this is mind blowing. I don't know that anybody could have predicted 3 years ago that this would be the case, that there would be this much optimism. And again, this is CBS News. This is not Fox News or some random site or whatever doing this that has reason to boost Trump's stats. Now, we'll see what happens as time goes on. Do they overreach? Do some things happen that bring people back to where they were? But I don't know that he can ask for more. The pace that they're moving with just shows shows a better understanding of government, shows a stronger team. And again, that's for better or worse. But a lot is going on, and there's apparently a lot being said that the Americans like. You can be upset about that. I'm just giving you the facts and the data. Have I completely figured out why? I have not. But something needs to change. Something's going on here, and people are really not feeling what they were feeling before. All right, as always, I enjoy being with y'all. I will be back next week. Again, if you want to hear another segment, all you got to do is become a patron, brother. Y'all know what it is. All right, Ann Camp. There's a cross that neither political conservatism nor progressivism is fit to bear. There's a civic hearing in need of faithful witnesses who love social justice and won't surrender the truth to be loved by the world. Politic with the boldness and compassion of Jesus Christ. Until next time, Ann Camp. Holla at you.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.